I'm very pleased to welcome Catherine Mueller, Dr. Catherine Mueller, to present the next award, the Honorary Lifetime Member Award. Et c'est Dr. Catherine Mueller qui va présenter notre lauréate. Merci.
Thank you, Jimmy. So this year's winner of the Honorary Lifetime Member Award is a full professor of applied linguistics and language education at OISE and the head of the Center for Educational Research in Languages and Literacies. She has extensive international experience in second and foreign language education research, teacher development, and teaching of multiple languages. A collaborator with the Council of Europe since 2008, and co-author of the CEFR companion volume, she has coordinated various international research projects, both in Canada and in Europe. Elle est elle-même plurilingue, avec des publications et des présentations en anglais, en français, en italien et en allemand, incluant un apprentissage continu de l'espagnol. Elle a coordonné divers projets internationaux financés par le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines du Canada et par le Conseil de l'Europe, a fait des présentations dans de nombreux pays, a publié une diversité d'ouvrages dans différentes langues et a été invitée comme conférencière principale à des conférences prestigieuses tant au Canada qu'à l'étranger. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Enrica Piccardo.
So, merci beaucoup pour cette introduction et merci énormément pour ce prix. Donc, j'ai préparé une présentation parce que je pensais que c'était l'occasion pour faire un peu le point non seulement sur le prix, mais aussi sur le travail que j'ai fait. Donc, je vous propose encore, peut-être vous êtes un peu fatigué, mais en fin de journée, encore de réfléchir à ce thème qui me tient très à cœur, Enhancing Learners' Agency through Action-Oriented Scenarios. As a teacher educator for the Ministry of Education and then later in initial teacher education at the University of Genoa, also I was working really closely between university and school, different types of school. Then I moved to France in my life. I became a researcher, became an associate professor, and was involved in teacher education also there in my new role. I was part of the Institut Universitaire de Formation des Maîtres in Grenoble, which is now another name. But again, it was research and teaching, not just because we researchers are also teachers, but because I really believe in breaking the classroom walls. And then I moved to Canada, and initially I was involved at my university a lot as teacher educator, as I was associate professor, but in teacher education for FSL, and then moved a lot on research for MA and PhD students in English. But very early on, when I came to Canada, I proposed myself and was selected to become part of CASALT and to work with these wonderful colleagues for several years. I remember when I joined CASALT, somebody asked me, the former director at that time, she asked me to do something to present myself. And I remember I did this one. And with my life, moving from one country to another, and then some quotations that really are important for me. And now with this award, I feel I'm coming full circle. So where I see that all these things are really informing each other. And I think that by giving me this Lifetime Membership Award, that you kind of recognized that, and that's really precious for me. So thank you very much. And now I would like to move to the presentation. And I'm also the presentation, you have to understand it as a kind of kind of summary of certain things that I have developed over time and that I have been particularly important for me in my career and in the way I have worked with teachers and in research over time. So this is, the plan of my presentation, just an introduction. We have always, always understand that we are faced with diversity at different levels, all the time, every day, societies, languages, and individuals. And we must continually think of the fact that migration, first of all, is not the thing of today, is a thing that has always existed, but certainly it has skyrocketed and it continues across the globe in different directions. So, so the world is really in a constant movement, and with it are languages. And if we take the example of Canada, we see how languages have moved over the years. There is English, there is French, of course. Remember that between these 2 years, there was the possibility also of changing the reply and saying that you had more than one language. So the statistic is not so linear, but it's not what interests me, is this other part, the other. And the other is increasing in these 2 years. But the funny story, the interesting story here is that this other includes a lot of languages, and each of these languages belong to families. So inside of these families, there are many languages. And if we could do and go with these other languages, we would still find a diversity. What does it mean? That we have really diversity at every single level. And no matter how deep we go, we never find uniformity. We have this highly dynamic social tapestry, and we move really to societies of creative knowledge economies, producing ideas. We needed to move towards that. And Bauman gives us the metaphor of liquid modernity to try and cope with this big change. Now, we are all teachers, teacher educators, researchers. So what is our reaction to that? Well, the immigrant's language can be catalyzers for change, really. And this increase can be seen as a challenge. And unfortunately, a lot of people see that only as a challenge, but certainly it is a challenge, but it's an enormous opportunity for us to rethink education in general, and for us specifically language education. In particular, it helps us make this big shift from seeing the language as a fixed code, something that has identifiable linguistic units that correlate a form and a meaning, like if they were little post-its that you change and put to different objects, to another view, integrational, the idea that the language is a second-order cultural construct that is always open-ended and incomplete, and arises out of the first-order activity of making meaning, of interpreting linguistic sign. And it's something that we don't do alone, but we do together, and it's situated in the groups, in the communities we live. So that's the big picture where we are. Now, when in this big picture, what we see when we hear and see and people talk languages and read languages is just the tip of the iceberg, because deep down in the iceberg, we have different linguistic trajectories. We have been socialized into different communities. We have different experiences. We have a different form of agency. And our plurilingual repertoire is different and constantly moving. And we are languaging and we are plurilanguaging all the time. So what actually happens is that from this very fertile humus, there is an emergent phenomenon, language. Language is an emergent phenomenon. It's not something that exists somewhere in a Platonic world, it's something that we do. And in the class, we go really from this linear vision of learning to communicate one language at a time, learning in the class, because later in the real world, you will use it as if the class was not the real world, to this complex vision of the class being a real world where all linguistic and cultural resources of the learners are active in their brain at the same time. Right? And I would say not just in their brain, in their heart as well. And so the class is not a tidy space of domesticated reality, but it's this messy and dynamic, authentic social space in which they operate in real time. It's a complete shift. This complete shift has been shaped and accompanied by a change in the theoretical framework. In particular, I think that complex dynamic system theories help us make sense of the situation we are in and the advances in research in language education, because we conceptualize mind, body, and environment as complex dynamic system. And so we see that learning needs to be rooted in situated and dynamic learning situation, because we are ourselves complex and dynamic systems, and so is the class, and so is the society, so is the school, so is the language itself. So learning occurs through this perception in action. And the learner needs to be social agents that are capable to perceive affordances and to act on them in tasks so that they achieve goals. So this learning builds really on this capacity of perceiving these affordances and perceiving them as invitations to action. And to perceive these affordances, you need to develop agency. Our learners need to develop agency, and they need to do actions, because through the mediation of action, they will little by little develop their agency. So if we abandon that linear view that we saw, we see that the language emerges from complex webs of action, and these actions all require some form of mediation. And language use is really non-linear, but nurtured by this repertoire, which are by nature plurilingual. And so mediation is really at the center of what a social agent does. And the class becomes really this space of collective knowledge, shared understanding that we need to make space for mediation. So that's the metaphor I had used. See a quote from Larsen, Freeman, and Cameron that explains that, and seeing the language learners really as social agents who collaborate in a creative process to construct a new meaning. So we've said that language is something we do together, and mediation is the core of this process, which is a process of knowledge construction, co-construction, and reconstruction. So in this is how research has really advanced, and research and policy documents and documents that support the work of teachers go hand in hand, as we know, in different contexts. Some 20 years ago, we had the CFR that was the product of a big movement. Europe was just opened, the Berlin Wall went down, there was much more movement, and there was this idea of changing the vision of language. And some very new vision, pioneering a new vision. But 20 years later, there's been all this reflection on language as a process of languaging, of mediation, that really required a new step into something. And that's when the new CFR is called CFR Companion Volume, but it's not an accompanying document. It's in reality the new version of the CFR. That's when it arrived. If we had to say what was the CFR 2001? Well, it really helped us break these four skills, terrible four skills that were kind of silos where we put everything and replace them by oral and written, reception and production. And then say, okay, there is that, but there is also interaction when you go into the social use of language, and there is mediation. Mediation was just mentioned, but was not developed. But sorry, I switched off the light here. Okay, but with the new CFR, we go a step further. It's not just the social use of language, it's really this co-constructing of meaning. And there are many new scales of descriptors for mediation, about 30, and scales for plurilingual and pluricultural competence, new online communication, because interaction was before not as clear as now. And the interesting thing is that we have the social agent who mobilize their plurilingual and pluricultural competencies. So the CFR 2001 was forward-looking because it introduced this idea of agency. It said that the social agent mobilized their competencies and strategy in the fulfillment of a task, and they called for a new vision of seeing languages in action. But now we have all the tools, the descriptors, and all the guidance to make this call a reality and to put it into practice. In particular, we have these three concepts that help us really, that are linked to each other: plurilingualism, mediation, and action orientation. Plurilingualism is the dynamic and developing linguistic repertoire, a network with connections. Mediation is what the learners does to create the bridges and construct and convey new meaning. And action orientation is something that happens in real life oriented scenarios and tasks that make space for agency. So broadens the idea. We had some theorization, because the interesting thing with the action-oriented approach was that it was born bottom-up, like it developed bottom-up. It was introduced as an idea by the CFR 2001, but then teachers experimented, and then it was only theorized more recently. And we have here 2 publications on that. So I'm going to skip this one because we don't have that much time. But I want to go a little bit more into mediation, just to tell you how was mediation organized in the new CFR. Mediating communication, mediating concept, and mediating text are the 3 macro categories in which mediation descriptors are organized, because they are kind of complementary. The mediating text is what teachers are very used to do. Mediating communication is something that happens in the class, and teachers do that, but sometimes they're not necessarily aware of them. And mediating concept is basically the more forward-looking part of mediation, plus the strategies. So see, in every moment, these social agents are languaging because they think things through together. They are in a process of self and other regulation when they mediate communication, and they find a formulation that enable understands of text for themselves or for others. This is when you open the CFR companion volume, the way you see mediation organized, and each of these is, of course, the title of a scale of descriptors, all going from A1 all the way to C2. Examples give you a sense of what we are talking about here. Can collaborate with people from other backgrounds, can appreciate the different ideas, feelings, and viewpoints, can build on one another's information and idea to come up with a concept of solution, ensure that their person addresses what they mean by asking appropriate questions. So immediately seeing these descriptors, teachers have ideas of types of tasks that they can develop in order to put these learners into action, and into an action that takes into consideration linguistic and cultural plurality.
How do we do that in practice? Well, in practice, if we embrace an action-oriented approach, we move away from the classic communicative tasks. So that can be something like the students work in groups and choose the 5 best questions and answer them from the documentary. Where the teacher really orchestrates all the tasks with precise instructions one by one, one after the other, that needs to be followed in that exact way if you follow the task. To action-oriented tasks, where is the learner who takes the responsibility and sometimes even the design of what they are doing, and the teacher is of course, orchestrates things in the sense that it creates the scenario, but it's kind of for moments behind the scenes in the way they accompany the students. For some cases, even like in professional life. Academic action-oriented task and scenario provide precisely these affordances I was talking before. So an action-oriented has this real-life task, a real-life-oriented task, the strategic and autonomous decision-making process, and the transparency of objectives and assessment that we perceive we do with the can-do statements, and the scenario translated this into practice. So scenarios are really this blueprint for projects, and they contain multiple tasks that bring them to a sort of some form of final artifacts. If we think of a typical communication task, you have in group pick up a celebrity prepared to tell the class the most important facts about him, her, so that your classmate can guess who you're talking about, becomes an action-oriented task where you have a context. The town hall wants to name the new park in the town after a celebrity. In group, pick up a celebrity and prepare your proposal to take part in a public post. So you have a product. That means you have an audience. It is not whoever. Remember, you have to research. So you have a product, you have a goal, and you have to research to do it also by yourself. That's where your agency and autonomy enters. And you have to work with the others to justify your selection and be able to present it. So it's a totally different perspective. I've worked with scenarios now for a while in my research. Here you have 3 research projects I have coordinated. 2 have been funded by SHIRK. One on the left, the LinkDear project, in which we constructed with the teachers a lot of scenarios and tasks and action-oriented and plurilingual tasks that populated a tool called Light. And then we reused them with other teachers, several others, in 2 areas of Italy, Lombardy, which is smaller geographically, but has as many inhabitants as Ontario. And then in 3 provinces in Italy, Lombardy, Lazio, which is the region of Rome, and Campania, which is the region of Naples. So for a total of we had around 90 teachers and 1,500 students here of 4 different languages. And here we had around 150 teachers and over 2,000 students. So these were our pillars in the initial project, and action-oriented, plurilinguals, reflection, and technology. And in this project, we created several scenarios, and we prepared all the steps that the students would have to follow. This is how the students saw the scenarios, but behind, in the back end, the teachers had really all their handouts. Basically, they had all the planning in a Word document that they could use and follow and adapt, because they adapted. These were some of the most used scenarios that have been chosen by the teachers. And as you can see, scenarios can be done at different levels, can be adapted. And that was very interesting. So creating a scenario means choosing or creating or writing one, selecting the descriptors, and then creating the subtask and the culminating task, doing a reflection, and creating the assessment and self-assessment rubric. So, for example, a scenario like this one that we created initially for German and then for in ESL and French was to create new fairy tales, new stories that would have a modern moral. And the final product, okay, there are goals, general goals, linguistic and non-linguistic, but the final product was really to create this fairy tale. So they had to, a lot of work went from the teachers into choosing the descriptors. And the descriptors were communicative activities, the what, and the descriptors of the how, like what language, linguistic, pragmatic, sociocultural, plurilingual dimension. And as you can see, they also adapted. Of course, in the CFR, you wouldn't have fairy tales, but the idea to have descriptors is that they're not written in stone. You can adapt them to your specific goal. So, and then you go with the steps, and then all the way until you have your culminating task. But the interesting thing is that already the steps are kind of mini tasks. You don't study grammar and vocabulary for a long time until you get to the final task. You embed the needed language into already working, as I said at the beginning, in the same way at the different levels until you arrive to the culminating task where very probably students are able to succeed because they've been using that type of learning for a while. And these were some of the products that the students created at the end. So very modern twist, as you can see, for this storytelling. These were some of the assessment and self-assessment checklists that teachers and students used for this task. But people say, okay, fine, I see for higher level, etc. But how can we do for different levels, for example? Well, scenarios can be used and adapted at different levels, as I said. This is a very typical topic that we have in many textbooks, healthy eating. And this we can have at the basic level, for example. What will students be learning to do in the language to achieve the scenario? And how will students complete the different activities? At which level of difficulty? And if we are at an A1 level, well, then you have a certain type of descriptors, and if a certain type of descriptors both for the what and for the how. And then you have your scenario, which is relatively, we are at an A1, so see, you have, can use simple words to write personal information in a journal, etc. So you have your steps, interviewing friends, log, etc. And you go all the way to creating the menu and presenting the menu. Can we imagine now this scenario at a higher level? Yes, we can, and take a B1 level. Of course, one of the things a B1 typical is I can reply to unplanned questions on topic I'm presenting on. Very different from the A levels, no? And I can reply by giving a brief reason and explaining about something, which is not what you expect to at an A1 level. So, but the system is the same. The fact is that you will change the scenario it will require, compare, reflect on, see other different types of goals. And then you move in the same way, but then you have things like compare alternatives, create a pamphlet, and then present your new menu. So the idea is basically the same, and you have a sample activity, and we don't go into that. To summarize all that, the scenarios are unifying tools that make it visible and possible to structure learning around actions that are vivid, defined, and concrete. And the action-oriented approach has really moved away from an accumulation of knowledge, a view of accumulation of knowledge and know-how, toward the logic of strategic activation of resources that you use to achieve an objective. And you organize the course, if you organize a course around scenarios with culminating tasks, it's easier to link teaching and assessment right away. When we had the big 2 projects with many, many teachers, the teachers spent a lot of time at the beginning in choosing the descriptors and thinking about this linking of the assessment. And initially I thought, oh my gosh, they use so much time. But then that was the best part, in a sense, for them, because they got this familiarity with the system, and then they knew how to do. And when they did other scenarios, that was the part that went more smoothly. So the use of the descriptors helped them relate the learning aims to real-world language use, giving a framework to this action-oriented learning, providing this transparent signposting to learners. Learners knew why they were doing something, what were the objectives, negotiating priority, studying the ongoing needs, analysis always, and as I said at the beginning, suggesting classroom tasks and introducing a criterion reference assessment, which is so important. Some of the voices of your colleagues, see, the action-oriented means giving them a real task. It was something real. They had a target again. They had an objective, more involving for me, for them, more interesting. And then the plurilingualism handled so well in these tasks. And not only English was stressed, every language, every language had their space there. And they can see that every language gives them a complete idea of their being. Somebody I overheard before said, yes, languages construct as ourselves. And then it was, another teacher says, I liked that it was something creative. And you have really to put the things together with your own creativity. And then another big success was with students with special needs, because they really wanted to take part as all the others in the same way. And they found the collaborative strategies to help each other to be there. So it's a proficiency perspective. The action-oriented approach is really this can-do put into practice, moving away from that deficiency perspective that has really challenged our way of doing for a long time. And it's really a shift away from the syllabus based on linear progression to syllabus based on needs analysis and real task, designing curricula based on real world communicative needs and organized around the real tasks with the can-do that communicate aims to learners. They help teachers and they help learners. They help teachers because they can plan over a longer time, and they consider assessment as part of the journey, help inclusivity, but they help learners as well, because they become really social agent, and there is this sense of pride, feeling part of a community, and linking class with the real world. I have with the teachers created a book together where there were some chapters more conceptual that we wrote as researchers with my research assistant, and there were all these 18 case studies written by the teachers who used the scenarios. And as you see, there are different languages because the teachers collaborated across languages. They did the same scenario, they helped each other across languages. That was really something that we really liked at the end of the project. There's been another book that I've had the honor of being the conseillère scientifique, c'est La francophonie en action, et on voit bien qu'ils ont travaillé, les collègues, sur des scénarios actionnels plurilingues qui ouvrent à la médiation. Tout le livre est organisé dans des scénarios qui sont comme des mini-scénarios, 1, 2, 3, 4, qui mènent à un projet de fin de module. Donc, chaque module est organisé sous forme de scénario. Et à chaque fois, c'est le scénario qui guide. C'est pas la grammaire, mais c'est le scénario avec les activités communicatives langagères et puis la qualité de la langue et l'aspect culturel, plurilingue, sociolinguistique qui amène à la tâche finale. Ça, c'est un des projets, par exemple, que vous auriez, un de type de scénario où vous voyez bien qu'il y a un contexte, qu'il y a une audience, qu'il y a quelque chose de concret qu'on prépare à la fin avec des contraintes qui obligent à prendre des décisions tout le temps. Je sais qu'il y a eu un grand projet ici en Ontario sur mais peut-être vous en avez déjà parlé, qui a créé toute une série, tout un site web avec toute une série de scénarios qui même se sont appuyés au début sur des manuels pour montrer aux enseignants qu'on peut faire de l'actionnel même si on part d'un manuel parce qu'on peut créer des scénarios actionnels. Et ils ont fourni toutes les démarches pour y aller. Alors là, je vous laisse regarder le site. Et je voulais juste vous dire que complexity is key to diversity and sustainability in nature, in life, and in language teaching. So we really should strive to move away from this type of view of nature to this type that really makes space for action and unprevisibility in a sense. And I thank you, and we have a new project, so I invite you to participate in our survey if you scan the QR code, and I thank you for today.